After seeing that text from Chris, my mind was spinning. The next morning, I tried to play it cool, but it was like I was seeing Emily in a whole new light. She was so casual, like nothing was wrong, even smiling as she kissed me goodbye before heading off to her so-called client meeting. How could someone live a double life so easily? That's when I decided I couldn't keep sitting around, waiting for her to come clean. I needed more proof, something undeniable. So, that evening, while she was in the shower, I made the decision to check her phone. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Her messages with Chris were a treasure trove of betrayal. Long conversations about how he makes her feel alive and complaints about how I don't pay attention to her anymore. One message stuck out the most. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. I felt a cold wave of anger rush through me. Last night, she told me she was working late. Instead, she was with him. The text painted a picture of someone who was deeply invested in this affair. There was no one-time mistake here. Still, I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to see for myself just how far this went. So, the next day, I installed a GPS tracker on her phone. I told myself I'd only use it if I felt I needed to. But let's be honest, I already knew I'd need it. For the next few days, I kept my head down and let her dig her own grave. Every time she claimed to be working or meeting a client, I checked the tracker. And every time, she was somewhere she had no reason to be, restaurants, the park, his apartment. The patterns were clear. One night, after she claimed she had to finalize paperwork for a property, I followed her. I parked down the street and waited. Sure enough, after about 30 minutes, she walked out of an apartment building, laughing and holding hands with Chris. My stomach churned, and I had to stop myself from storming out of the car. I didn't want to give her any warning. That night, when she got home, I played dumb. I asked how her meeting went, and she spun the most detailed story you could imagine about this fictional client who couldn't decide on a floor plan. She even used hand gestures to act out how frustrating it was. The lies rolled off her tongue so easily, and all I could do was nod, biting my tongue to keep from blowing up right then and there. But the lies weren't just confined to me. She was lying to everyone, her sister, her friends, even Jake. It broke my heart when he asked me one evening, "Why is Mommy always working? Doesn't she want to play with me anymore?" I didn't have an answer for him. I decided it was time to bring someone else into this mess. Emily's sister Rachel is one of the most direct people I know, and I figured if anyone could help me figure out my next step, it was her. So I told her everything. Rachel was furious. Not at me, but at Emily. How could she do this to you? To Jake? To all of us? She fumed. She didn't need convincing to help me get more proof. We tracked Emily the next night. She'd said she was heading to a work dinner, but instead, she drove to the same apartment building I'd seen her at before. Rachel and I parked across the street, waiting. Sure enough, after an hour or so, she walked out with Chris. They were laughing, their bodies way too close for friends. Rachel wanted to confront her right then and there, but I held her back. "Not yet," I said. "I need her to have no way out when I finally bring this up." That's where I am now. I've got proof, texts, photos, location data, but I'm not sure how to approach this. Part of me wants to call her out and throw her out of the house immediately, but then I think about Jake. I don't want him to grow up in a broken home, but I also don't want to raise him in a house built on lies. Should I confront her and risk her turning this into a huge fight? Should I talk to a lawyer first? Should I try to make her confess? I honestly don't know what to do. The waiting was unbearable. Every day that passed felt like I was living in a pressure cooker, the weight of Emily's lies building and building. I knew I had all the proof I needed, but pulling the trigger and confronting her felt like stepping off a cliff. I didn't know where I'd land, or if I'd land at all. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Emily came home late again one night, looking disheveled but oddly cheerful. She made small talk while unpacking leftovers she clearly didn't eat, all the while avoiding my eyes. I couldn't do it anymore. I had to say something. "Emily," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "We need to talk." She glanced at me, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her expression, fear. She recovered quickly, forcing a casual smile. "Sure, what about?" I stood and motioned toward the living room. "Sit down." Her smile faded. What's going on? She asked, her tone shifting to defensive. I took a deep breath, feeling my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. I know about you and Chris. Her reaction was immediate. Her face went pale, her eyes widened, and she let out a sharp laugh. What are you talking about? Who's Chris? She said, her voice a little too high-pitched. I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. With a few swipes, I pulled up the photos of her and Chris outside the apartment building. I handed her the phone without a word. Emily's hands shook as she looked at the screen. Her face crumbled as realization set in. I can explain, she whispered, her voice trembling. Explain what? I snapped, my calm veneer finally cracking. Explain why you've been sneaking around, lying to me, lying to Jake. Explain how you're spending your time with him instead of your family. She started crying, big heaving sobs that would have broken me once. But now, they just made me angrier. It's not what it looks like, she stammered. He's just a friend. I swear. Don't insult me, I said, cutting her off. I've seen the texts, Emily. I've seen the locations, the photos, all of it. Just a friend doesn't send texts like the ones I've read. Her sobbing stopped abruptly, and she straightened, her face hardening. Fine, she spat. Yes, I've been seeing him, but it's because I've been so unhappy. You're never around, you're always working, and you don't even notice me anymore. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't perfect, far from it, but her trying to pin this on me was infuriating. So that's your excuse? I shot back. I work to provide for this family, for you and Jake, and instead of talking to me, you decide to cheat? I try to talk to you, she yelled, standing up. But you never listened. You were always too busy or too tired. And Chris was there for me. He made me feel wanted. Wanted, I echoed, laughing bitterly. You think that justifies blowing up our marriage? Destroying our family? Jake adores you, Emily. What are you going to tell him when he finds out what you've done? That shut her up. She sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was her muffled sobs. What do you want me to say? She finally whispered. I messed up. I know that. But I don't want to lose my family. Please, we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Her words hung in the air, but they felt empty. Fix this? How do you fix something so broken? I don't know if we can fix this, I said, my voice flat. I don't know if I even want to try. But I do know one thing. You're going to leave. You can stay with Rachel, with Chris, I don't care. But you're not staying here. Emily started crying again, but I didn't care. I'd spent months drowning in her lies, and I wasn't about to let her drag me under any longer. The rest of the night passed in a blur. She packed a bag and left without another word, and I sat alone in the living room, staring at the wall. The house felt impossibly quiet without her, but for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. That night, I didn't sleep much. After our argument, Emily stormed off to bed without saying another word. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying her excuses in my head. Her words didn't add up, but I also didn't want to jump to conclusions. Not without undeniable proof. The next morning, Emily was gone before I woke up. She'd left a note on the counter. Went in early to prep for a big client meeting. Let's talk tonight. The same carefully chosen words designed to seem innocent, but I wasn't buying it anymore. Later that day, I was at my desk when my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. Hey, you free for lunch? I need to talk to you about something. Her tone was casual, but I could hear an edge to it. Rachel was never one to sugarcoat things, so I knew this wasn't just a social call. We met at a diner near her office. Over greasy burgers and coffee, she leaned in and lowered her voice. Listen, I don't want to alarm you, but I heard something weird about Emily from one of her coworkers. That caught my attention. Weird how? Rachel hesitated, then said, You know Jessica, that woman Emily's always complaining about? The one she says is out to get her. Yeah, Emily had painted Jessica as this conniving co-worker who constantly undermined her. From what I'd heard, Jessica was ambitious and didn't exactly play nice, but I'd never thought much about it. Well, Rachel continued, Jessica told someone at work that Emily's been acting strange, leaving the office at weird times, being super secretive. She even suggested Emily might be distracted by something or someone. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you mean, someone? Rachel gave me a look. I think you know what I mean. Look, I'm not saying Jessica's right, but she's been keeping tabs on Emily. I can ask her to talk to you directly if you want. I didn't know how to feel about that. Letting Jessica, Emily's sworn enemy, into our business felt like a betrayal in itself. But at the same time, if she had information that could help me understand what was going on, I couldn't ignore it. Fine, I said. See if she's willing to talk. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Jessica at a coffee shop. She was sharp, dressed like she was ready to walk into a boardroom at any moment, and she wasted no time getting to the point. I'll be honest, she said, stirring her coffee. Emily and I don't get along. But I think you should know something. She pulled out her phone and showed me a picture, a grainy shot of Emily sitting in a car with a man. That was taken last week, Jessica explained. She said she was meeting a client, but she was gone for hours. When she came back, she had lipstick smudged on her cheek. Not exactly professional. My throat tightened. The photo wasn't exactly damning, but it didn't look good either. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Jessica leaned back in her chair, a sly smile playing on her lips. Because I can't stand liars, and I know Emily's been feeding everyone lies about me for years. Consider this a mutually beneficial arrangement. You get the truth, and I get to watch her squirm. Her honesty was brutal, but I appreciated it. What else do you know? Jessica shrugged. Not much yet, but if you want, I can keep an eye on her at work. She's not as clever as she thinks, and people talk. I wasn't sure how to feel about essentially recruiting Emily's rival as an ally, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Okay, I said. Keep me updated. Over the next week, things got weirder. Emily's boss, Patrick, started coming up in conversation more often. She'd mention him casually. Patrick wants me to stay late to prep for this showing. Or Patrick's putting a lot of pressure on me to close this deal. But there was a nervous edge to her voice whenever she brought him up. One evening, she came home late, her blouse wrinkled and her hair slightly out of place. I couldn't help but ask, "Rough day?" She hesitated for a split second before nodding. "Yeah, Patrick's really pushing us to hit our numbers this quarter." Then she quickly changed the subject, asking about Jake's day at preschool. The next day, Jessica texted me, "You need to look into Patrick. Something's not right there." That night, I searched online for Patrick. His professional profile was spotless. A seasoned real estate executive, married with 2 kids, the whole package. But as I dug deeper, I found whispers of scandal, rumors of inappropriate relationships with employees, messy departures from previous companies. Nothing concrete, but enough to make me wonder. Then came the breaking point. Jessica sent me another message. Emily left with Patrick after lunch today. Said they were meeting a client, but she didn't come back to the office. Thought you should know. I felt a mix of rage and dread. Was Emily just working late like she claimed? Or was there more to her relationship with Patrick than she was letting on? I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more proof. But the walls were closing in, and I could feel the truth just out of reach, waiting to destroy everything. The more I thought about Jessica's message, the harder it was to sit still. Emily's behavior, her growing closeness with Patrick, and the suspicious gaps in her stories. It was all adding up to something I couldn't ignore. I decided it was time to step up my game. That night, while Emily was showering, I did what I had sworn I wouldn't. I snooped through her purse. My heart was racing as I rifled through receipts, random pins, and a crumpled grocery list. Then, tucked into the pocket of her wallet, I found it. A business card for an upscale restaurant downtown. On the back was a handwritten note. 8 p.m. Friday. Looking forward to seeing you. P. I stared at the card, my mind racing. Patrick. There was no way this could be innocent. I snapped a picture of it on my phone before putting it back exactly where I found it. Friday night rolled around, and Emily told me she had another work dinner. She was dressed to the nines, heels, a sleek black dress I hadn't seen in years, and a dab of perfume that used to be reserved for date nights with me. Big client? I asked, keeping my tone light. Yeah, she said quickly, grabbing her purse. Patrick wants me to help close the deal. It could be a huge commission if we pull it off. I forced a smile and nodded. Good luck. As soon as she left, I called Rachel. I need a favor, I said, explaining the situation. Can you watch Jake for a couple of hours? Rachel didn't even hesitate. Bring him over. And keep me posted. Once Jake was settled at her house, I headed downtown. I parked across the street from the restaurant and waited. Sure enough, just after 8 p.m., Emily walked in, alone at first. Minutes later, Patrick arrived. He wasn't dressed like a boss meeting an employee. No suit or tie, just a crisp button-up shirt and jeans. They sat at a small table in the corner, leaning in close as they talked. For an hour, I watched from my car, my chest tightening with every laugh and every touch. At one point, Patrick reached across the table to brush something off Emily's cheek, and she didn't pull away. It felt like someone had punched me in the gut. When they finally left, I followed at a distance. They didn't go back to the office like she'd claimed. Instead, they walked down the street to a hotel. I watched as Patrick held the door open for her, and they disappeared inside. I sat in my car, staring at the hotel entrance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm in there, to demand answers, to make a scene, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. I needed more than just my anger. I needed proof. The next morning, I got a text from Jessica. Heard about the work dinner. Did you find out anything? I hesitated before replying. Yeah, it's worse than I thought. Jessica was relentless. You need to dig deeper, she texted back. If she's involved with Patrick, it's not just personal. It could be professional, too. He's got a history of screwing over employees. Don't let her drag you down with him. Her words hit me like a bucket of ice water. If Emily was tangled up in something shady with Patrick, this wasn't just about our marriage anymore. It could affect everything. Our finances, Jake's future, even my reputation. That afternoon, I decided to confront Emily. Not directly about Patrick, but about her constant absences and growing distance. When she got home, she was in a surprisingly good mood, humming to herself as she put her keys down. How was the dinner? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. She hesitated, just for a moment before smiling. It went great. The client loved the pitch. Patrick thinks we'll close the deal by next week. I nodded slowly. You've been spending a lot of time with Patrick lately. Emily froze, then forced a laugh. Well, he's my boss. It's kind of unavoidable. Is that all it is? I asked, my voice low. Her smile faltered, and for a moment, I thought she might come clean. But then her expression hardened. What's that supposed to mean? She snapped. It means you're never home anymore, I said, my frustration boiling over. You're always with him, or working late? Jake's noticed it too. He's asking why you don't play with him like you used to. Emily's face softened, and she looked genuinely hurt. I've been working hard for us, she said quietly. For this family. Why are you making me feel guilty for trying to provide? The guilt card. Classic. I'm just asking for some honesty, Emily, I said, crossing my arms. She sighed heavily, like I was the unreasonable one. I don't know what you want me to say, but I'm doing my best. Can we not do this right now? I'm exhausted. I'll let it drop for now. But as she walked away, I felt more determined than ever to get to the bottom of this. Jessica was right. There was more to this than just an affair. And I wasn't going to let Emily's lies destroy everything I'd worked so hard to build. The next few days were a blur of careful observation and mounting frustration. Emily was walking a tightrope, trying to act normal at home while clearly keeping secrets. She didn't realize I was tracking her movements, and I noticed a new pattern. Frequent trips to Patrick's house during the day. Not the office. His house. It was maddening. Every time I saw her location pop up in his upscale neighborhood, I felt my chest tighten. Was it work-related? Personal? Both? I needed more than GPS coordinates to figure this out, and luckily, Jessica had a plan. I've been talking to some people in the office, she told me over the phone one evening. Emily isn't the only one Patrick's been close with. He has a reputation for mixing business with pleasure, and not in a good way. What does that mean? I asked, my stomach twisting. Jessica sighed. It means he's got a history of grooming employees, using his power to get what he wants, then discarding them when it suits him. But he's careful. He makes sure nothing can be proven. And you think Emily. I think Emily's caught in the middle of something. Maybe willingly, maybe not. Either way, it's messy, and you need to be careful. Jessica's words left me feeling uneasy. Emily had always been ambitious. But was she willing to risk everything to climb the ladder? Or had Patrick manipulated her into this mess? Either way, the fallout could be catastrophic. Jessica wasn't done. "There's a company dinner next week," she said. "Patrick's hosting it at a private venue. Emily will definitely be there, and it might be the perfect chance to see what's really going on." The idea of crashing a work event wasn't exactly appealing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was my best shot at uncovering the truth. I agreed, and Jessica promised to text me the details. In the meantime, I tried to keep things as normal as possible at home. I played with Jake, cooked dinners, and avoided asking Emily too many questions. She was distant, but she still acted like she wanted to keep up appearances, smiling when Jake hugged her, making small talk during meals. It was almost enough to make me doubt everything. Almost. The night of the dinner arrived, and I found myself sitting in my car outside the venue, my heart pounding. Jessica had texted me earlier. "It's a cocktail event. She'll probably be with Patrick most of the night. Watch and listen, but don't get caught." I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but I knew I couldn't back out now. I slipped in through a side door and positioned myself near the bar, trying to blend in with the crowd. The room was filled with sharply dressed people, laughing and clinking glasses. I spotted Emily almost immediately. She was standing with Patrick, her hand lightly resting on his arm as they talked to another couple. Her laugh rang out, bright and genuine, completely at odds with the woman who had been snapping at me and avoiding our son for weeks. Patrick leaned in close, saying something that made her smile, and I felt a surge of anger. They looked too comfortable, too familiar. I wasn't the only one watching them. Jessica appeared at my side, holding a glass of wine. "There you are," she said, her tone casual. "They've been like that all night. Do you think everyone notices?" I asked, keeping my eyes on Emily. Jessica snorted. "Of course. But no one says anything. Patrick's too powerful, and Emily," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Let's just say people are talking." Before I could respond, Patrick and Emily broke away from the group and headed toward a private hallway. Jessica nudged me. "Follow them." I hesitated. This felt like crossing a line, but Jessica was already moving. I trailed behind her as she led me to a small corridor near the back of the venue. We pressed ourselves against the wall, just out of sight, as Patrick and Emily stopped in front of a door. "I don't know Patrick," Emily was saying, her voice low but clear. "This is getting too complicated. I'm not sure I can keep." "You're doing fine," Patrick interrupted smoothly. "Stick with me, and you'll get everything you've ever wanted. You just need to trust me." Emily hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she might walk away. Instead, she nodded. "Okay." Patrick smiled and opened the door, motioning for her to step inside. Jessica grabbed my arm before I could move forward. "Wait," she whispered. "We need to be smart about this." My mind was racing. Emily's tone had been conflicted, like she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to be there. But Patrick's confidence, his control over her, was undeniable. I didn't know what was happening behind that door, but I knew one thing. This wasn't just about an affair. It was something bigger. Jessica tugged me back toward the main hall. "We've seen enough for tonight. Let me dig around. I'll see what else I can find out about Patrick." I nodded numbly, my anger simmering just below the surface. Emily was in over her head, and whether she realized it or not, she was dragging our entire family down with her. The ride home from the company dinner was a blur. Jessica had been adamant that we needed to tread carefully, but my patience was wearing thin. Emily had come home shortly after I did, breezing in like nothing was out of the ordinary. She hung her coat by the door, kicked off her heels, and grabbed a glass of water. "Dinner ran late," she said, barely glancing at me. "But it went really well. I think Patrick's going to close the deal with the client." "Sounds like a productive night," I replied, doing my best to keep my voice steady. She nodded and gave me a distracted smile before heading upstairs. I sat in the living room, staring at the glass she'd left on the counter. There was a faint smudge of lipstick on the rim, a tiny detail that made my blood boil. I couldn't shake the image of her leaning in close to Patrick, smiling at him the way she used to smile at me. The next morning, I woke up to another message from Jessica. "Patrick canceled all his meetings this morning. Word is he's working on something off the books. Emily hasn't shown up yet either. Just thought you want to know." I was already dressed for work, but I called in sick. If Emily wasn't at the office, I needed to know where she was. Sure enough, the tracker on her phone showed her in Patrick's neighborhood again. This time, I didn't just sit back and watch. I drove there. When I pulled up, I parked a few houses down and waited. Emily's car was in the driveway, but the house looked quiet. After about an hour, the front door opened and Patrick stepped out. He wasn't dressed for work, just jeans and a sweater, and he carried a briefcase that looked oddly out of place for a casual morning at home. As he got into his car and drove off, I made a split-second decision. I got out of my car and walked up to the house. My heart was pounding as I rang the doorbell. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and Emily stood there, her face frozen in shock. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice higher than usual. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. The house was immaculate, with expensive furniture and modern decor. It felt cold, like no one actually lived there. Emily closed the door behind me, crossing her arms. "I'm working," she said defensively. "Patrick asked me to go over some documents for the client." "At his house?" I shot back. "Where's your laptop, Emily? Where's the paperwork?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, and for the first time, I saw cracks in her carefully constructed facade. "Look," she finally said, her tone softening. "I didn't want to tell you, because I knew you'd overreact. Patrick's been under a lot of stress, and he asked me to help him with some personal matters. It's not what you think." I stared at her, the weight of her lies pressing down on me. "Then what is it, Emily? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty bad." She sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "It's complicated, okay? Patrick's going through some stuff, and he needed someone he could trust. I didn't want to drag you into it, because I knew you'd make it into something it's not." Her explanation was flimsy at best, but I didn't have the proof. I needed to call her out completely. "Not yet. I don't believe you," I said, my voice low. "And I don't trust him." Emily's eyes flashed with anger. "Patrick's my boss. He's been nothing but supportive of me. I can't believe you're accusing me of whatever this is." "Supportive?" I snapped. "Emily, you're spending more time with him than with your own family. Jake's starting to notice. Do you even care about what this is doing to us?" Her expression wavered, and for a moment, I thought she might break. But then she straightened, her jaw set. "I care about my career, and I care about providing for our family. Maybe if you supported me instead of constantly questioning me, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The audacity of her words left me speechless. Before I could respond, she grabbed her coat and keys. "I can't do this right now. I need to get back to work." And just like that, she was gone, leaving me standing in Patrick's pristine living room, fuming. I left soon after, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. Jessica was right. This wasn't just about an affair. There was more at stake, and I had to find out what it was before it was too late. After leaving Patrick's house, I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to calm myself down. Emily's lies were piling up, and I could feel the truth slipping just out of reach. I hated feeling powerless, like I was chasing shadows while she stayed one step ahead. Jessica texted me later that afternoon. "Anything new?" I pulled into a parking lot and called her. As much as I didn't trust her motivations, Jessica was proving to be my only real ally in this mess. I confronted Emily at Patrick's house. I said, skipping the pleasantries. She gave me some excuse about helping him with personal matters. It was complete garbage. Jessica's laugh was bitter. "Of course it was. Patrick doesn't need help. He needs people to clean up after him when he screws things up." "What do you mean by that?" I asked, leaning forward in my seat. She hesitated before responding. "There's a reason Patrick's been fired from 2 other companies. He gets too close to his employees, crosses boundaries, and then leaves them holding the bag when things go south. It's a pattern. That hit me like a punch to the gut." "And you think Emily's next?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I wouldn't put it past him to manipulate her into something she can't get out of. He's charming, but he's dangerous. You need to watch your back, and hers." As much as I hated hearing it, Jessica's warning made sense. Patrick wasn't just some sleazy boss hitting on employees. He was calculated, and Emily might have walked right into his trap. Over the next few days, I started digging into Patrick's past. It wasn't hard to find whispers of scandal, disgruntled former employees, lawsuits that never went to trial, and vague statements about amicable departures that clearly weren't. But nothing was concrete. It was all rumors and half-truths, just enough to paint a picture of someone who thrived in chaos without ever getting caught. Meanwhile, things at home were getting worse. Emily was more distant than ever, spending long hours working and barely speaking to me when she was home. Jake was starting to notice, asking why Mommy didn't read him bedtime stories anymore or why she was always on her phone. One evening, after I put Jake to bed, Rachel called. "Have you talked to Jessica lately?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yeah, why?" "She told me something that's been bugging me. Apparently, Emily's been talking about moving up in the company, like way up. Jessica thinks Patrick might be dangling some kind of promotion in front of her to keep her on the hook. A promotion. That would explain Emily's sudden obsession with pleasing Patrick, but it didn't make the situation any less messy. If that's true, then he's using her," I said, gripping the phone tightly. Rachel sighed. "Maybe. Or maybe she's using him. I hate to say it, but you need to prepare yourself for that possibility." Her words hung in the air long after we hung up. Was Emily a victim in this, or was she a willing participant? The thought made my stomach turn. The following week, Jessica came through with another piece of the puzzle. She called me during her lunch break, her voice low and urgent. "I got into Patrick's calendar," she said. "He has a meeting tomorrow afternoon at a hotel downtown. Emily's name is on the invite." My blood ran cold. "You're sure?" "Positive. It's listed as a client debrief, but trust me, it's not. You need to be there." The next day, I cleared my schedule and parked outside the hotel an hour before the meeting. I had no idea what I was going to do if I caught them. Confront them? Take pictures? Wait for more evidence? My thoughts were racing as I watched the entrance, my heart pounding every time the door opened. Emily showed up right on time, wearing a sharp business suit and heels. She looked every bit the professional, but I couldn't ignore the way she checked her reflection in the glass door before walking in. I waited another 10 minutes before stepping inside. The lobby was bustling, and no one paid me any attention as I made my way to the elevator. Jessica had texted me the room number, and when I reached the right floor, I found a quiet corner to wait. 15 minutes passed, then 30. I was starting to lose my nerve when the door to the room opened, and Patrick stepped out. He looked calm, collected, like nothing unusual had happened. A few moments later, Emily followed, smoothing her hair and glancing nervously down the hallway. They didn't see me as they walked toward the elevator, talking in low voices. My hands clenched into fists as I stayed out of sight, watching them disappear into the elevator. I waited until they were gone before approaching the door. It was ajar, and inside, the room was empty except for a conference table with scattered papers. Whatever they'd been discussing, they'd left no evidence behind. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This wasn't just a work meeting. The way they interacted, the secrecy, the hotel, it all pointed to something more. But I still didn't have enough to confront her. Not yet that I drove home from the hotel in a daze, my mind racing. The image of Emily stepping out of that room with Patrick replayed over and over in my head. She hadn't looked guilty, exactly, but there was something off about the way she glanced around, like she was making sure no one had seen them. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my anger had started to boil over again. Emily wasn't home yet, which was no surprise. I had a few hours before she would stroll in with another excuse about late meetings or demanding clients. I couldn't wait much longer, though. I called Rachel. "She met him at a hotel," I said as soon as she answered. Rachel didn't say anything at first. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. "Are you sure it wasn't a work thing?" "It wasn't work," I snapped. "Jessica tipped me off, and I was there." They came out of the same room, talking like nothing was wrong. I don't know what happened in there, but it wasn't work. "Okay," Rachel said carefully. "So what now? Are you going to confront her?" "I want to, but..." I hesitated. "I need more. If I push her now, she'll just lie or twist the story. I need something concrete, something she can't talk her way out of." Rachel sighed. "Be careful, okay? If you're going to keep digging, make sure you don't get caught. Emily doesn't strike me as the kind of person who handles being cornered very well." That was putting it mildly. When Emily finally came home that evening, she looked exhausted, or maybe just stressed. She kicked off her heels and gave me a quick smile as she hung up her coat. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah," she said, grabbing a glass of water. "Patrick's been piling on the work lately. It feels like I can't catch a break." I raised an eyebrow. "You were with him all afternoon?" Her head snapped up, and for a split second, she looked panicked. "Yeah, we had a meeting." "Why?" "Just curious," I said, shrugging. "You've been spending a lot of time with him lately." Emily frowned, setting her glass down. "He's my boss. Of course, I'm spending time with him. Why are you making this into a thing?" "I'm not," I said evenly. "I just think it's interesting that you've been so busy with Patrick, but you barely have time for Jake or me." Her frown deepened. "Don't start this again, okay? I'm doing my best to juggle everything. You have no idea how much pressure I'm under." "Maybe you should talk to someone about that," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It sounds like Patrick's asking a lot of you." Emily grabbed her glass and walked toward the stairs. "I don't have time for this right now," she muttered. "I need to get some sleep." I watched her go, my anger simmering just below the surface. She wasn't just avoiding the conversation. She was shutting it down entirely. The next day, Jessica called me again. "I found something," she said, her voice tight. "You might want to sit down for this." I was at work, but I stepped outside to take the call. "What is it?" "Patrick's been moving money," she said. "There are accounts in his name, but the transactions don't add up." And guess whose name popped up on a joint account? My stomach dropped. Emily's? Bingo. It's not a ton of money, but it's enough to raise eyebrows. I don't know what he's up to, but he's definitely not just her boss. I leaned against the wall, trying to process what she was saying. "You're sure about this?" "Positive," Jessica said. "I've got screenshots to prove it. He's been transferring small amounts into the account every few weeks. It looks like he's trying to keep it under the radar." My head was spinning. If Patrick and Emily were sharing a bank account, this wasn't just about an affair. It was something bigger. "What do I do with this?" I asked, my voice tight. Jessica hesitated. "That depends. Do you want to blow this wide open? Or do you want to keep watching and see where it leads?" I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted to confront Emily right then and there, but the smarter part of me knew I needed more. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about figuring out exactly how deep this went. "Send me the screenshots," I said finally. "I'll figure out the next move." Jessica promised to email them that night, and I hung up feeling both furious and sick to my stomach. Patrick wasn't just manipulating Emily. He was involving her in something shady, and she was letting him. By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront Emily until I had every piece of the puzzle. If she wanted to lie, fine. But when the truth came out, there would be no escaping it. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at my laptop while Emily slept upstairs. Jessica had come through with the screenshots. They showed a clear trail of small but consistent transfers between Patrick's account and the joint account he shared with Emily. The amounts weren't staggering, usually a few $100s at a time, but it was enough to look suspicious. My mind raced with possibilities. Was Patrick paying her off? Was she involved in something illegal? And why hadn't she mentioned this account at all? I didn't know where to start, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep sitting on this information. The next morning, I called Rachel. "I need you to do me a favor," I said as soon as she picked up. "Another one?" she replied with a hint of sarcasm. "What now? Can you watch Jake tonight?" I asked. "I need to figure out what Emily's doing, and I don't want him around if this blows up." Rachel's tone immediately turned serious. "Of course. Bring him over whenever." That evening, after dropping Jake off, I parked a few blocks away from Emily's office and waited. I had a feeling she wasn't going to work late like she claimed. Sure enough, just after 7 p.m., she left the building, but not alone. Patrick was with her. They walked to his car, laughing like old friends. He opened the passenger door for her, and she slid inside without hesitation. I followed them from a safe distance, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. They didn't go to a restaurant or a client's office. Instead, they pulled into a nondescript parking lot behind a small building that looked more like a storage facility than anything else. I parked a few spaces down and waited, watching as they entered the building together. Minutes turned into an hour, and still no sign of them. My mind raced with possibilities. What could they be doing here? Was this related to the joint account? I couldn't sit still any longer. I got out of my car and walked toward the building, keeping to the shadows. The door they'd entered was locked, but I noticed a side window slightly ajar. I hesitated for only a moment before pushing it open and climbing through. Inside, the air was stale and smelled faintly of dust and old paper. The hallway was dimly lit, and I could hear faint voices coming from a room at the end of the corridor. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The voices grew louder as I approached. It was Patrick, his tone low and commanding, and Emily, sounding more hesitant than I'd ever heard her. "This is risky," she said. "What if someone finds out?" "They won't," Patrick replied smoothly. "Not if you stick to the plan. This is nothing compared to the payoff we'll get once everything's in place." "I don't know, Patrick," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. "It feels like too much." Patrick's tone turned sharp. "You're in this now, Emily. There's no backing out. We've come too far." I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed the door open, and both of them whipped around to face me. Patrick's expression shifted from surprise to annoyance, while Emily's face went pale. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the small room. Patrick didn't miss a beat. He stepped forward, blocking Emily as if to shield her. "This is a private matter," he said coolly. "You shouldn't be here." "Private?" I shot back. "My wife sneaking around with her boss isn't exactly private." I turned to Emily, who looked like she wanted to disappear. "What are you doing, Emily? And don't tell me it's work, because I've seen the bank statements." Emily's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything. Patrick, however, smirked. "I see you've been playing detective," he said. "But you're in over your head. Emily's been helping me with a delicate situation, and frankly, it's none of your concern." "Helping you with what?" I demanded, stepping closer. "That's classified," Patrick said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Classified?" I laughed bitterly. "You're a real estate agent, not a CIA operative. Try again." Emily finally spoke, her voice shaky. "It's not what you think, okay? Patrick needed my help with some financial stuff, and I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd overreact." "Financial stuff?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're sharing a bank account with him. Emily, what part of that isn't shady?" Patrick cut in, his tone now threatening. "I think you've overstayed your welcome. Leave, or I'll have security escort you out." I stared at him, my fists clenched, then turned back to Emily. "You're coming with me," I said firmly. Emily looked torn, glancing between Patrick and me. After a moment, she nodded and walked toward me, her head down. "Think carefully before you do anything stupid," Patrick called after us. I ignored him and led Emily back to the car. The drive home was silent, tension crackling between us. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I turned to her. "You're going to tell me everything," I said. "No more lies, no more excuses. Start talking." Emily didn't say anything for a long moment. She sat in the car, staring at her lap, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. I waited, my patience thinning by the second. "Well," I said, my voice cold. "I'm done waiting, Emily. Start talking." She finally looked up at me, her face pale. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then explain it to me." I snapped. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're sneaking around with Patrick and hiding a shared bank account. So, tell me, Emily, what am I missing?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. I'd seen too much, and her excuses had worn thin. "Patrick, he's been helping me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Helping you with what?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. She hesitated, then said, "With money. Things have been tight lately, and I didn't want to burden you. He offered to advance some commissions to help me out, and he said it was easier to handle through a separate account." "You stay out here, incredulous. You expect me to believe that? You're working late, meeting him at hotels, sneaking around behind my back, and it's all because of a financial favor." "It's the truth," she insisted, her voice rising. "I know how it looks, but nothing's going on between us. Patrick's been good to me. He's just trying to help." Her words sounded rehearsed, too perfect, too neat. "So why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Why keep it a secret if it's so innocent?" Emily's face crumpled. Because I knew you'd overreact, she said. You've been suspicious of everything lately, and I didn't want to fight about it. I just wanted to fix things on my own. Her answer didn't satisfy me. If anything, it made me angrier. Fix things? I echoed. Emily, this isn't fixing anything. You've been lying to me for weeks, months, and you're not even admitting the full truth right now. Do you realize what you're doing to this family? To Jake. Her expression shifted at the mention of Jake. For a moment, she looked genuinely ashamed. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said, her voice cracking. I leaned back in my seat, staring out the windshield. Her words were hollow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was only telling me half the story. When we finally went inside, I told her we'd finish the conversation later. I need time to think, I said, my tone sharp. Emily nodded and went upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room. I poured myself a drink, my mind racing. Her excuses didn't add up, and Patrick's smug threats replayed in my head. He wasn't just some concerned boss helping out an employee. He was using her, manipulating her. And Emily was either too naive to see it, or she was complicit. I couldn't let this go on any longer. The next day, I called Jessica. Emily's sticking to her story, I said, pacing my office. She claims Patrick's helping her with money, but it doesn't feel right. There's something she's not telling me. Jessica snorted. Of course there is. Patrick doesn't do anything out of the goodness of his heart. If he's helping her financially, it's because he's getting something in return. What could that be? I asked. Jessica hesitated. I have a theory, but you're not going to like it. Try me. Patrick's been trying to push a big property deal through, she said. It's a risky move, and he needs someone to take the fall if it backfires. He's probably using Emily as his scapegoat, putting everything in her name, so he can walk away clean. The thought made my stomach turn. And what happens to her if it blows up? She loses everything, Jessica said bluntly. Her job, her reputation, everything. I felt sick. If Jessica was right, Patrick wasn't just manipulating Emily. He was setting her up to take the blame for his own shady dealings. And Emily, blinded by ambition or desperation, was letting him. What do I do? I asked. Jessica's voice softened. You need to confront Patrick. Call his bluff. He's not used to people standing up to him, and if you rattle him enough, he might slip up. The thought of facing Patrick again wasn't appealing, but I knew Jessica was right. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about protecting Emily and our family from whatever scheme Patrick was running. Later that evening, while Emily was out, I drove to Patrick's house. It was dark, and his car was in the driveway. My heart pounded as I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Patrick opened the door, looking surprised but not alarmed. Well, this is unexpected, he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. What can I do for you? We need to talk, I said, stepping forward. Patrick didn't move. His smirk widened. I'm not sure what you think you're going to accomplish here, but I'll bite. Cool mean. I followed him into the living room, where he gestured for me to sit. I stayed standing. Let's cut to the chase, I said. I know what you're doing with Emily. The money, the meetings, it's all part of your plan to cover your own ass. But I'm not going to let you drag her down with you. Patrick's expression didn't change. He poured himself a drink and took a slow sip before responding. You've got quite the imagination, he said. But if you think you can scare me, you're wasting your time. Try me, I said, my voice low. For the first time, Patrick's confidence faltered. He set down his glass and leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Be careful, he said quietly. You don't know what you're getting into. Patrick's warning hung in the air like a dark cloud. His eyes locked on mine, unwavering, as if daring me to push further. My fists clenched at my sides, but I forced myself to keep my voice calm. Oh, I know exactly what I'm getting into, I said, stepping closer. You've been playing this game for years, haven't you? Using people, manipulating them, and then tossing them aside when things go south. But this time, you picked the wrong family to mess with. Patrick raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning. Family, he said, dragging the word out mockingly. You mean Emily? The same Emily who's been running to me every time she can't handle her own messes. My blood boiled, but I didn't take the bait. You've been using her, I said firmly. You've got her tied up in whatever scam you're running, and you're planning to leave her holding the bag. But here's the thing. I'm on to you, and I've got enough to make sure you can't pull this off. Patrick chuckled, the sound low and dismissive. You don't have anything, he said, taking another sip of his drink. You're just a jealous husband grasping at straws. If you had proof, you wouldn't be here trying to scare me. You'd already have gone to the authorities. He wasn't wrong. My evidence was thin, just Jessica's screenshots and a trail of suspicious behavior. But I wasn't going to let him see my uncertainty. Proof can be gathered, I said, keeping my tone steady. And trust me, I will gather it. But you can save yourself a lot of trouble if you back off now. Cut ties with Emily, clean up whatever you're doing, and stay the hell out of my family's life. Patrick leaned back, swirling his drink in the glass. For a moment, he looked like he was considering my words. Then his smirk returned, colder than before. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said. But let me give you a piece of advice. Stay out of this. You don't want to make an enemy out of me. I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. Without another word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove home, I replayed the conversation in my head. Patrick wasn't scared yet, but I'd planted a seed of doubt. Now I just had to figure out how to make good on my threat. When I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine. She looked up as I walked in, her expression cautious. Where have you been? She asked, trying to sound casual. Out, I said shortly. Her eyes narrowed. Out where? I dropped my keys on the counter and turned to face her. I went to see Patrick. Her face went pale. What? You heard me? I said. I confronted him. I know about the money, Emily. I know about the meetings, the joint account. And now I know he's been using you as part of his little scheme. Emily set the glass down, her hands shaking. You shouldn't have done that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why not? I demanded. Because it's easier to keep lying? To keep pretending everything's fine while he drags you down with him. She didn't answer. Instead, she sank into a chair at the kitchen table, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, I thought she might finally tell me the truth. I didn't have a choice, she said finally, her voice muffled. What do you mean, didn't have a choice? I asked, my anger flaring again. Emily looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. Patrick, he knows things. About me. About my past. He said if I didn't help him, he'd ruin me. I was scared, okay? I thought I could handle it, but it's gotten so out of control. Her words hit me like a gut punch. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. What does he know? Emily hesitated, then shook her head. It doesn't matter, she said. What matters is that he's not going to stop. He'll do whatever it takes to protect himself. I sat down across from her, my mind racing. We can fix this, I said. But you have to be honest with me, Emily. No more lies. No more secrets. If we're going to fight this, I need to know everything. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. Okay, she said, but you're not going to like it. I braced myself as she began to speak, unraveling a story that was more tangled and twisted than I'd imagined. Patrick wasn't just manipulating her. He was blackmailing her, using a mistake from her past to keep her under his control. By the time she finished, my anger had shifted from her to him. Patrick wasn't just a manipulative boss, he was a predator. And I wasn't going to let him win. That Emily's confession was a tangled web of guilt, fear, and manipulation. She sat across from me, her face pale and her hands trembling as she laid it all out. Before we met, she began, her voice shaky, I was in a bad place. I got involved with someone who wasn't good for me. It ended badly, and I had to walk away from everything. I thought I'd left it all behind. I leaned forward, my frustration boiling over. What does this have to do with Patrick? She hesitated, then said, Patrick knows. He found out about him. I don't know how, but he said if I didn't help him, he'd tell everyone. He'd make sure I lost my job, my reputation, everything. Help him how? I pressed, though I already had a sick feeling I knew the answer. She looked down at the table. He's been moving money through different accounts, trying to cover his tracks. He said he needed someone trustworthy to handle the paperwork, someone who wouldn't ask questions. At first, it was just small things, filing documents, setting up meetings, but then he started transferring money into the account he made me open. And you didn't think to tell me? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I was scared, she shot back, her eyes welling up with tears. I thought if I just went along with it, he'd leave me alone. I didn't know it would get this bad. The anger I'd been holding on has softened, just a little. She wasn't innocent, but it was clear Patrick had backed her into a corner. We need to go to the police, I said. Patrick can't get away with this. Emily shook her head furiously. No, he'll ruin me. You don't understand. He has emails, messages, things that make it look like I was a willing participant. No one's going to believe me. Then we'll make them believe you, I said firmly. We'll get proof, real proof, that he's behind all of this. How? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer yet, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. Patrick had been playing a dangerous game, and it was time to turn the tables. The next day, I called Jessica. He's blackmailing her, I said bluntly, using something from her past to keep her quiet while he launders money through her account. Jessica didn't sound surprised. That's his MO, she said. He finds someone with a skeleton in their closet and uses it against them. It's why no one ever stands up to him. Well, we're going to, I said. But we need more evidence. Something solid. Jessica was silent for a moment, then said, There's a client meeting on Friday. Patrick's been working on this deal for weeks, and if it goes through, he'll be cashing out big time. He's going to need Emily to finalize the paperwork. If we can get our hands on those documents, it might be enough to take him down. The thought of Emily going anywhere near Patrick again made my skin crawl, but it was our best shot. When I told Emily about the plan, she was hesitant. What if he figures out what we're doing? She asked, her voice trembling. He won't, I assured her. You just need to act normal. I'll take care of the rest. Friday came quickly, and my nerves were shot. Emily left for the meeting early in the morning, looking more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Jessica and I parked a few blocks away from the office building where the meeting was taking place. She'd managed to get her hands on a key card from a friend in the office, and we planned to slip in once things were underway. It felt like a scene from a bad spy movie. We crept through the halls, avoiding cameras and ducking into empty rooms whenever we heard footsteps. When we finally reached Patrick's office, Jessica swiped the key card, and the door clicked open. Inside, the desk was immaculate, but it didn't take long to find what we were looking for. Jessica rifled through a stack of files while I kept watch. Got it, she whispered, holding up a folder. Inside were contracts, bank statements, and transfer orders, all with Emily's name prominently displayed. But tucked in the back was something else, a document with Patrick's signature authorizing the transfers. It was exactly what we needed. We copied everything and put the originals back in place before slipping out of the building. My hands were shaking as we walked back to the car. This is it, Jessica said, her voice breathless. This is enough to bury him. But I wasn't so sure. Patrick was smart, and I knew he wouldn't go down without a fight. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me, her face pale. How did it go? She asked. I held up the folder. We've got him, I said. Her relief was palpable, but I could see the fear in her eyes. What now? Now, I said, we take this to the police, and then we make sure Patrick can't hurt anyone else ever again. The following morning, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table, the folder of evidence between us. She hadn't touched her coffee, and I could see her hands trembling as she stared down at the documents. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I said firmly. It's the only way to stop him. The longer you stay quiet, the more power he has over you. She nodded slowly, but her fear was obvious. What if he denies everything? What if they don't believe me? They'll believe the evidence, I said, tapping the folder. We have his signature, his bank transfers, everything. He can't talk his way out of this. Emily didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. I called Rachel and asked her to watch Jake for the day. I didn't want him to overhear any of this, or worse, be around if Patrick found out we were taking action. Before we left for the police station, I texted Jessica, we're taking the evidence in. Keep an eye on Patrick, and let me know if he does anything suspicious. Her reply came almost immediately. Good luck. Be careful. The drive to the station was tense. Emily was silent the entire way, her hands clutching the edge of her seat. I didn't try to reassure her again. I knew words wouldn't help. When we arrived, I asked to speak with a detective. After a short wait, we were led into a small, plain office. The detective, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, introduced herself as Detective Morales. "What brings you in today?" she asked, sitting down across from us. I glanced at Emily, then pulled the folder from my bag. "We have evidence of fraud and embezzlement," I said. "My wife's boss has been using her to move money through illegal accounts. He's also been blackmailing her to keep her quiet." Morales raised an eyebrow, but didn't interrupt as I laid out the details. Emily added to the story, her voice shaky but steady enough to explain Patrick's threats and manipulation. When we showed Morales the documents, she leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. "This is significant," she said, flipping through the pages. "If this checks out, it's enough to launch a full investigation." Emily's breath hitched. "What happens now?" she asked. "We'll need to verify everything," Morales said. "And we'll need your cooperation moving forward. If you're willing to testify, this could be the evidence we need to press charges." Emily hesitated, glancing at me. I reached over and squeezed her hand. "We'll do whatever it takes," I said. After leaving the station, we sat in the car for a few minutes, neither of us speaking. The weight of what we'd just done hung heavy in the air. "You did the right thing," I said finally. Emily nodded, but her eyes were distant. "I hope so," she murmured. That evening, Jessica called me. "You stirred the hornet's nest," she said without preamble. "What do you mean?" "Patrick's been acting strange all day, canceling meetings, making calls from his private line. Word around the office is that he's planning to leave town." "Leave town?" I echoed, my chest tightening. "Yeah," Jessica said. "He's probably trying to cover his tracks before the cops show up. If you're going to make a move, it needs to be now." Panic clawed at the edges of my mind. If Patrick disappeared, everything we'd done would be for nothing. I called Detective Morales and told her what Jessica had said. "That's concerning," Morales admitted. "But we can't arrest him until we have a warrant, and that'll take time." "Can't you at least watch him?" I asked. "Make sure he doesn't skip town?" "We'll do what we can," she said, but her tone didn't inspire confidence. When I hung up, Emily was waiting in the doorway, her arms crossed. "What's going on?" she asked. "Patrick might be trying to run," I said. Her face went pale. "What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. For now, all we could do was wait, and hope that Patrick's arrogance would keep him in place long enough for the law to catch up. Later that night, as Emily and I sat in the living room in uneasy silence, my phone buzzed. It was Jessica. "He's at the office. Still making calls? If he's leaving, he hasn't done it yet." I showed the text to Emily. "Maybe he's waiting," I said. "If he's smart, he'll want to clean up as much as he can before he goes." Emily shook her head. "He's not smart. He's desperate." Her words gave me a flicker of hope. Desperate people made mistakes, and Patrick had made plenty already to be why morning. The tension in the house was unbearable. Emily barely ate, pacing the kitchen while I sat at the table, trying to plan my next move. I couldn't just sit there, hoping the police would act fast enough to stop Patrick. If he skipped town, everything we'd fought for would be lost. Jessica texted me just after 9 a.m. "Patrick's still here, but he's packing up his office. Looks like he's leaving for good." My chest tightened. I couldn't let him slip away, not when we were so close to exposing him. I grabbed my phone and dialed Detective Morales. "He's packing up his office," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "If you're going to stop him, you need to act now." Morales sighed. "I've already pushed your case to the top of the queue, but these things take time. Until we have a warrant, there's not much we can do." "What about surveillance?" I asked. "Can't you at least keep eyes on him?" "We're working on it," she said. "In the meantime, I suggest you stay put. Let us handle it." But staying put wasn't an option. Around noon, Jessica called. "I think you need to come down here," she said, her voice urgent. "What's going on?" "Patrick's been making some weird moves," she said. "He's called a meeting with a couple of senior executives, and he's locked the door. I think he's tying up loose ends." I didn't even hesitate. I grabbed my keys and told Emily I'd be back soon. "Stay here," I said firmly. "And don't answer the door unless it's me or Rachel." The drive to Patrick's office felt like it took forever. Jessica was waiting for me in the parking lot, her face pale and her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "He's still in there," she said. "But you need to be careful. If he knows you're here, he could bolt." I nodded and followed her inside. The office was eerily quiet, most of the staff out for lunch or holed up in meetings. Jessica led me to a small alcove near Patrick's office, where we could hear faint voices coming from behind the closed door. "He's trying to spin this," Jessica whispered, probably telling them some story about how this is all a misunderstanding. I clenched my fists, every instinct screaming at me to barge in and confront him. But I knew that would only make things worse. We waited for what felt like an eternity before the door finally opened. Patrick stepped out, flanked by two executives. His face was calm, collected, as if he hadn't just been caught orchestrating a massive fraud scheme. The executives left, and Patrick returned to his office, closing the door behind him. Jessica turned to me, her expression grim. "That's it," she said. "He's covering his tracks. If you're going to stop him, now's your chance." My phone buzzed. It was Emily. "Everything okay?" "Jake's asking where you are." I texted back quickly. "Stay home. I'll explain later." Taking a deep breath, I walked to Patrick's office and knocked on the door. "Come in," he called, his voice smooth and confident. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Patrick's expression didn't change. He didn't even look surprised to see me. "Well, if it isn't my favorite amateur detective," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What can I do for you?" "You know exactly why I'm here," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're not getting away with this, Patrick. The police know everything. It's only a matter of time before they come for you." Patrick smirked, unbothered. "You really think you've won, don't you? Let me tell you something. People like me don't lose. You can cry to the cops all you want, but I'll be out of here before they even know what's happening." "Not this time," I said, stepping closer. "You've left a trail, Patrick. The joint account, the forged documents, the transfers, it's all there. You're done." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You're bluffing," he said. "If you had anything concrete, I'd already be in handcuffs." "Don't be so sure," I said. "And if you think Emily's going to protect you, you're dead wrong. She's done being your pawn." Patrick's smirk faltered, and I felt a surge of satisfaction. He wasn't as invincible as he wanted me to believe. Before he could respond, the sound of voices echoed from the hallway. Jessica poked her head into the office, her face tense. "You might want to come out here," she said. Patrick and I both turned toward the door. As we stepped into the hallway, we saw two uniformed officers walking toward us, followed by Detective Morales. "Patrick Langley?" Morales said, her voice firm. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Put your hands where I can see them." For the first time, Patrick's mask slipped. His face twisted in anger as the officers approached. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice rising. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "We know exactly who we're dealing with," Morales said. "And now you're going to have plenty of time to think about it." As the officers cuffed Patrick and led him away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. He was finished and Emily was finally free. Jessica turned to me, a faint smile on her lips. "You did it," she said. "We did it," I corrected, letting out a long breath. But even as relief washed over me, I knew there was still work to do. Emily and I had a long road ahead, and the damage Patrick had caused wouldn't be undone overnight. The house felt eerily quiet that night. Emily sat across from me at the dining table, her hands folded tightly together. The news of Patrick's arrest had spread quickly. Jessica had texted updates every step of the way, and by the time dinner rolled around, it was all over the local news. "He's really gone," Emily said softly, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. I nodded, staring into my coffee. "Yeah, he is. They got enough evidence to make sure he doesn't come back from this." For the first time in weeks, Emily looked like she could breathe. Her shoulders, always tense and drawn up like she was bracing for a blow, relaxed just slightly. "I thought he'd never be stopped," she said. "Well, he's stopped now," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "But that doesn't mean we're out of the woods." Emily flinched, but she didn't argue. "I know," she said. "I have a lot to make up for. With you, with Jake, with everything." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms as I looked at her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy with everything that had gone unsaid for weeks, months, maybe even years. Why didn't you come to me sooner? I asked finally, my voice quiet but steady. Emily looked down at her hands. I was scared, she said. I thought you'd hate me, that you'd think I was weak. I didn't want to admit how far and over my head I was. And by the time I realized how bad it was, it felt like it was too late to turn back. Her honesty surprised me. I'd expected more excuses, more deflection. But her words sounded genuine. And for the first time, I saw just how much guilt she'd been carrying. You should have trusted me, I said. We're supposed to be a team. Emily, I can't help you if you shut me out. I know, she whispered. And I'm so sorry. For everything. For the lies, for dragging you into this. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you, if you'll let me. I wanted to forgive her. I wanted to believe that this nightmare had been an anomaly, that we could go back to the way things were before Patrick had slithered his way into our lives. But trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. It's going to take time, I said finally. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen, but if you're willing to put in the work, so am I. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She nodded, her voice trembling as she said, I'll do whatever it takes. Over the next few weeks, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Emily started therapy, both for herself and for us as a couple. I wasn't sure what to expect from counseling, but it was surprisingly helpful. For the first time in years, we started talking, really talking about our fears, our insecurities, and the things we'd both been holding back. Jake seemed to sense the change, too. Emily made a point to spend more time with him, reading him bedtime stories and taking him to the park. His laughter, once a bittersweet reminder of what we'd nearly lost, became a source of hope. Jessica, true to form, didn't let Patrick's downfall fade quietly. She filed a formal complaint with the company, exposing the full extent of his misconduct. The fallout was messy, but Jessica came out on top. She even got the promotion Patrick had dangled in front of Emily, a fitting twist, I thought. As for Patrick, the last we heard, he was facing multiple charges and a lengthy legal battle. Emily had cooperated fully with the investigation, providing testimony and additional evidence that sealed his fate. One evening, months after Patrick's arrest, I stood on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Emily stepped out to join me, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool breeze. Jake's asleep, she said softly. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the sky. I've been thinking, I said after a moment. About what? About how close we came to losing everything, I said, and about how much I've learned because of it. Emily looked at me, her expression cautious but open. And what have you learned? I turned to her, my voice steady. That trust isn't just about being honest. It's about leaning on each other when things get hard, even when it's scary. We forgot how to do that. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I don't want to forget again, she said. Neither do I said. As we stood there, the weight of the past few months began to lift. It wasn't perfect. There were still scars, still moments of doubt, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving forward. Together.